Since September 2023, the United States has opened a bold and controversial new front in its decades-long war on drugs. But this time, the battlefield isn't the streets of American cities or the jungles of Latin America. It's the vast, unpredictable expanse of the open sea. The U.S. military, in coordination with the Coast Guard and allied navies, has shifted its focus to maritime operations, launching aggressive patrols and interdiction missions far from American shores. Their primary targets are fast-moving vessels in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific, which officials allege are used by powerful drug cartels to smuggle massive quantities of narcotics. These boats, often called narco-subs or go-fast boats, are designed to evade detection and outrun law enforcement, making them a formidable challenge for authorities. The Trump administration has justified these maritime strikes as acts of self-defense, insisting that the relentless flow of drugs poses a direct threat to national security. Officials argue that the scale and sophistication of cartel operations now require a military response, one that goes beyond the capabilities of traditional law enforcement agencies. By December 2025, at least 23 high-speed boat strikes had been reported, resulting in the deaths of 87 suspected traffickers and the destruction of numerous vessels. The aftermath of these operations often leaves behind wreckage and unanswered questions about the identities and intentions of those on board. Officials claim the ultimate goal is to intercept and destroy drug shipments before they can reach U.S. soil, thereby crippling cartel supply chains and reducing the flow of illegal substances into American communities. Seizures of drugs and arrests of suspected traffickers are touted as evidence of success. Supporters of the campaign argue that only the military has the resources, intelligence, and firepower necessary to confront these well-armed criminal organizations at sea. They point to years of failed interdiction efforts and say that a more forceful approach is long overdue. But critics warn that deploying military force against vessels suspected of drug trafficking, many of which may be civilian or unmarked, risks blurring the crucial line between law enforcement and warfare. They argue that such actions could endanger innocent lives, escalate violence, and set a dangerous precedent for future conflicts at sea. This unprecedented campaign has thrust the war on drugs into a complex legal and ethical gray zone, igniting fierce debate among lawmakers, human rights advocates, and military leaders over the proper limits of lethal force in what was once a civilian law enforcement matter. As the boundaries between war and policing continue to blur, the consequences of this new maritime strategy remain uncertain. Amid the deadly campaign, the stories of 5 survivors have exposed troubling inconsistencies in U.S. policy. 2 men rescued after a mid-October 2025 strike were repatriated to Colombia and Ecuador, a move designed to keep them out of the U.S. legal system. In another case, a lone survivor was left adrift and is presumed dead. The most controversial incident came with the campaign's first strike. 2 survivors clinging to wreckage were deliberately killed in a follow-up attack. These cases highlight a central question. Are these individuals criminals to be apprehended or enemy combatants to be eliminated? The fates, repatriation, abandonment, and targeted killing, reveal a lack of clear, humane protocol. Operational imperatives and legal anxieties, not consistent standards, seem to drive decisions. Survivors' lives hang in the balance, subject to ad hoc choices in a legally ambiguous space. The outcomes for survivors reveal a policy in disarray. The 2 men repatriated after the October strike were sent home to avoid legal scrutiny in U.S. courts. In contrast, another survivor was left to die at sea, raising profound moral and legal questions. The most disturbing case remains the double-tap strike. 2 men, no longer a threat, were deliberately killed as they clung to wreckage. Critics argue this violates international law and basic human decency. These 3 outcomes, repatriation, abandonment, and targeted killing, show decisions are driven by shifting priorities, not consistent ethics. Sometimes the priority is secrecy, sometimes expediency, sometimes total elimination. The lack of a coherent protocol means life or death calls are made in a disturbing ad hoc manner. The U.S. appears to be navigating this new conflict without a clear moral compass. The U.S. military's handling of survivors is shaped by a desire to avoid American courts. Bringing survivors to the U.S. would grant them legal rights and force the government to defend its secret strike program in public. Repatriation is the preferred option when possible, quietly removing individuals from U.S. jurisdiction. When that's not feasible, more brutal options, abandonment or targeted killing, are used to prevent legal challenges. The administration treats the campaign as a military operation, hoping to keep it outside domestic law. If a survivor ever reached a U.S. judge, the government would have to defend its secret legal rationale, a battle it wants to avoid. The fate of survivors is less about justice and more about minimizing legal risk. This policy prioritizes secrecy over human rights, and sometimes over life itself. The September 2, 2023, strikes at the campaign's most controversial precedent. After a U.S. missile destroyed a suspected drug boat, 2 survivors were seen clinging to wreckage. Instead of rescue, a second strike was ordered, killing them both. Admiral Frank Mitch Bradley, who gave the order, later argued the survivors could still salvage the drugs and complete their mission, making them legitimate targets. This logic redefined shipwrecked survivors as persistent threats, not people in distress. Top officials, including the Secretary of Defense, publicly supported this rationale. But legal experts and human rights advocates called it a potential war crime, arguing the survivors were hors de combat and protected under the laws of war. The double-tap strike became a lightning rod for criticism and debate. The double-tap strike and inconsistent survivor treatment have triggered sharp responses in Congress. Lawmakers demand legal justifications and clarity on the rules of engagement. Central to the debate is whether the U.S. is violating the principle of hors de combat, which protects those out of the fight. Critics say the survivors were no longer threats and targeting them was unlawful. The administration's claim that the U.S. is at war with cartels is widely disputed by legal scholars, including some conservatives. Many argue the laws of war don't apply, and the campaign is a law enforcement issue, not an armed conflict. Closed-door briefings have failed to satisfy Congress, and the refusal to release the legal memo fuels suspicion. Oversight is stymied, and fundamental questions of law and accountability remain unresolved. The Trump administration's legal defense hinges on a highly classified memo drafted by the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel, or OLC. This document, shrouded in secrecy, forms the backbone of the administration's justification for its controversial actions at sea. According to the memo, the United States is engaged in an armed conflict, not with another nation, but with powerful drug cartels. This unprecedented claim allows the administration to invoke the laws of war, granting the military broad authority to use force against suspected traffickers and their vessels. The memo further argues that the true targets are not the people themselves, but the illicit drug shipments. Boat crews, under this logic, are seen as operators of a hostile system, rather than as individuals with legal rights. This legal reasoning justifies the use of lethal force as long as the drugs remain intact and could potentially reach U.S. shores, even if the people involved are left stranded or shipwrecked in dangerous waters. Senior officials have repeatedly echoed this rationale in public statements, insisting that the mission's primary goal is to destroy narcotics and disrupt the supply chain by any means necessary, regardless of the human cost. But critics, including human rights advocates and legal scholars, warn that this theory dangerously blurs the line between criminal activity and warfare. They argue it erodes long-standing protections for those who are no longer a threat or are out of combat, such as shipwrecked survivors or unarmed crew members. By treating suspected traffickers as enemy combatants, the memo's logic effectively dehumanizes its targets and sidesteps established international law, raising serious ethical and legal questions. While the administration's legal defense may appear internally consistent, it stands on shaky ground in the eyes of the international community, where the distinction between war and law enforcement remains a critical safeguard. The campaign's legality is causing unease within the military. Service members involved in the strikes are seeking outside legal advice, fearing personal liability for possible war crimes. Many are troubled by orders to target shipwrecked survivors, which clash with military ethics. Some officers feel pressured to approve strikes despite doubts, fearing career repercussions if they object. This creates a chilling effect, silencing those with valid concerns. The result is a culture of compliance over conscience, with internal checks eroded. The growing reliance on outside legal counsel signals a breakdown of trust within the chain of command. Internal dissent is now a critical, if quiet, front in the battle over this campaign's future. As 2025 draws to a close, the U.S. campaign against drug boats continues. but the mission is now shadowed by deepening legal and ethical uncertainty. What began as a bold effort to stem the tide of narcotics has become a flashpoint for controversy, with every operation scrutinized by the public and policymakers alike. The fates of 5 survivors from a recent strike have become a symbol of the campaign's chaos, exposing a policy landscape shaped as much by legal risk and operational convenience as by clear strategy. Their stories have ignited fierce debate about the human cost of these missions. At the heart of the storm is a secret legal memo, drafted to justify the strikes. Yet it has failed to satisfy critics in Congress, the legal community, and even within the military itself. Many argue that the memo's logic is dangerously thin, raising more questions than it answers. The core controversy centers on a fundamental shift, redefining the war on drugs as an armed conflict, a move that allows the use of military tactics once reserved for wartime. This redefinition has sparked alarm among legal scholars and human rights advocates. The so-called double-tap strike, where a second missile follows the first to target survivors, remains the most glaring example of what many see as possible unlawful killing. The images of shattered boats and drifting wreckage haunt the public conscience. The administration's defense of these actions sets a dangerous precedent, blurring the lines between combatant and civilian. Critics warn that such ambiguity could erode international norms and put innocent lives at risk, both now and in future conflicts. As the campaign pushes the U.S. into uncharted legal and moral territory, the true cost is measured not just in human lives lost, but in the erosion of principles that have long defined American conduct in war and peace. With each new strike, the urgent debate intensifies. Is the nation truly defending its security, or is it sacrificing its most fundamental values in the process? The answer remains as contested as ever, with no clear resolution in sight.